Good day and welcome to SCO BRICS Insight, where you look at what's really going on in the world of the BRICS. Now, just when you thought European Commission energy policy could not get any more chaotic or crazy, they've just threatened the major LNG supplier, Qatar, with massive fines over environmental and social governance policies. Yeah, the EU is telling a non-member country what to do and threatening to fine them. In turn, Qatar has threatened to cease supplying liquefied natural gas to the EU. This decision is following the implementation of the EU's new ESG directive, which aims to penalise companies that do not meet the required standards for carbon emissions. Now, for Europe, which has been looking for alternatives to Russia as its main source of gas, this could be a significant setback, especially given Qatar's ample potential number of buyers. In this context, EU countries are increasing their gas supplies from Russia. This week, Qatar's Energy Minister, Saad Al-Kababi, told the Financial Times that if any EU member states imposes fines on it for failing to comply with the Corporate Responsibility Directive, it will stop exporting its liquefied natural gas to Europe. Now, the regulation, which was adopted in May 2024, requires companies conducting business in Europe to pay 5% of their annual revenue if they're found guilty of carbon emissions or labour abuses. Now, it's anticipated that Qatar will face questions in both these cases. It's important to note that the regulations doesn't actually come into effect until 2027, but it's also been sufficient to provoke a strong reaction. Should it become apparent that it's likely to be fined 5% of its revenue for supplying gas, Kababi said that he would be unable to continue with this relationship. He says, "I'm not bluffing. 5% of Qatar Energy's revenue is equivalent to 5% of its state revenue, and it's the people's money, and we can't afford to lose that kind of money, and nobody would agree to it anyway." He said that the rules governing his entity were not viable. I mean, these rules would require the company to audit the labour compliance of all its suppliers, whose global supply chain includes 100,000 different companies. He also highlighted the challenge of complying with carbon emissions regulations, given its primary focus is on hydrocarbon production, which inherently emits CO2 during its use. Now, the corporate responsibility rules form part of a wider set of requirements aimed at achieving these greenhouse gases carbon emissions by 2050. Now, non-EU companies with a net turnover in the bloc exceeding 450 million will be subject to fines under the directive. Now, from the outset, the directive was met opposition from both foreign and domestic corporations, who view the rules as overtly burdensome and placing them at a competitive disadvantage in being able to do business. Now, before I continue, I'd like to make an appeal. If you like and enjoy my videos, you can help me fund the channel and my website, scobricsinsight.com, to further develop it. Now, you can do this by making a small donation, which is done by clicking on the thanks button at the bottom of the video screen, and everybody who donates does get a personal thank you from me, and I'm thanking you all now just for watching, because every view is important to me. Now, the Chemicals Industry Association, CEFIC, has cautioned that the directive creates similar significant litigation risks. He says chemical companies are most likely to be affected by the rules, for whom foreign gas and oil are actually vital, have called for the rules to be carefully reassessed to identify and address the areas that require simplification and the burden reduction to limit their liability. Consequently, the directive has impacted a significant number of companies. So it appears that Qataris have adopted a less than diplomatic approach, and it was noted that this is not solely related to liquefied natural gas. Kabi stated that the legislation would affect all Qatari exports to Europe, and that includes fertilisers and petrochemicals. It could also potentially influence the investment decisions of the Qatar Investment Authority, which is the country's sovereign wealth fund. Now, the company's CEO also emphasised that the contracts would not be violated. However, it has indicated its intention it will pursue legal action if these fines were implemented. Now, there may be room for compromise, but only if the fine is imposed on only income received from its exports to Europe. However, that would necessitate a comprehensive review of the current framework of doing business with Europe. In the meantime, of course, the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has promised that the common legislation would reduce reporting requirements in accordance with several of the bloc's green financial laws, including the Corporate Responsibility Directive. Now, the European Union finds Qatar's decision perplexing, particularly in light of the bloc's increasing reliance on Qatari LNG since 2022. This was intended to offset the losses of reduced hydrocarbon gas supplies from Russia. 2 years ago, the EU celebrated its significant progress in negotiations with Qatar. However, the introduction of these stringent ESG regulations, which even the US has recently begun to ease, has presented a substantial challenge for European importers. While Qatar's role in the EU's energy mix is relatively modest, supplying only 15.5 billion cubic meters of LNG in 2023, which is equivalent to about 5% of the gas imports to Europe, it's important to note that Norway's contribution is actually 6 times larger. But it's worth noting that these figures may be misleading due to the increased reliance on LNG, which is much more susceptible to external market fluctuations. The disappearance of even small volumes could lead to crucial price hikes, which would deal a further blow to European industries, which have already been seriously damaged by the upheavals of the energy market in the last 3 years. And it's also important to note that other suppliers may have concerns regarding the directive also. The US is under a new administration under Donald Trump, and they're very unlikely to adhere to these ESG guidelines, and the Trump government will provide support to its companies if they have concerns regarding the European consumers. Now, as for Qatar itself, the EU is not the most significant client for them. They are major clients and importers of LNG are India and the East Asian countries, so the conclusion of long-term contracts and the requirement for a significant effort to revise them creates a challenging situation for all parties. Meanwhile, the EU is compelled to increase its gas purchases from Russia, which all ties have been formally severed. Analysts from Bruegel calculated that over the last 11 months, exports from Russia to the EU amounted to 49.6 billion cubic meters, which is a quarter more than the same period last year. And Russia accounted for 18% of the deliveries compared to only 14% a year earlier. Plus, the increasing share is because Russian LNG, which is actually more expensive than the pipeline gas they were getting from Russia. Now, the growth is occurring despite the overall reduction in gas consumption in the EU, because of the ongoing challenges in key industries such as and places like Germany and France are getting worse and worse. The EU is currently experiencing a situation where its own laws and regulations are compromising the region's energy security. And as an example of Russia demonstrates, it's necessary to constantly look for solutions that circumvent the rules and the sanctions imposed by the Europeans themselves. While a modest reduction in reliance on foreign suppliers has been observed, it's still not evident that this supply is not attributable to energy conservation or domestic resource utilization. Instead, it's primarily driven by the financial losses experienced by the European Union's national economies. People are buying less gas as their companies close down, so the European madness continues. Thank you for watching. Please like, share and subscribe. And if you want to help me out, click on the thanks button and make a donation at the bottom of the screen. Thank you, and I'll see you all again soon. Thanks.